Good evening, I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today is April 26, 2023, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined, as always, by the Western Standard's opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford.
Hello again.
Hello. And joined by Western Standard Alberta senior columnist, Cory Morgan. How are you doing, Cory?
Very good.
All right. It's always a good show, but we got a really good show today. The Alberta election is right around the corner. It's already going. We all know it's going if you're around here, but it starts formally this coming Monday, and the polls are neck and neck. We're going to break down what the lay of the land looks like going into this campaign, a very unique, very unique, almost unprecedented campaign in Alberta's electoral history. We're going to talk about where the parties stand, where the leaders stand, and what we can expect, so much as we can predict any of this stuff. And within there, we're also going to be studying, looking at the Battleground Calgary. And boy, the two big parties are making it rain on Calgary, spending oodles and oodles of taxpayers' money to woo the all-important Calgarian swing voter. In Ottawa, the federal gun grab continues to pick up steam. News today that the federal government's reached an agreement with one of the firearm groups representing firearms and ammunition manufacturers to just buy from them a bunch of guns and ammunition that is now illegal, and moves coming re-amending the bill to steal people's otherwise lawfully acquired firearms in Canada with NDP support. Moving ahead with Marco Mendicino, the federal public safety minister, putting forward these new amendments that seem likely to pass and probably become law. And big surprise, Justin Trudeau says that during COVID, he didn't force anyone to get vaccinated. No, I'm not joking. No, that's really what he said. He did not coerce anyone to get vaccinated. I mean, that segment almost kind of writes itself, but we got to talk about it. You got to talk about something that crazy. But going back, speaking of taking your stealing your firearms, today's show is sponsored by the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I've been a member of the CSSA for over a decade, trusting them to defend my rights as a firearms owner in Canada. They're Canada's leading firearms rights organization. If you're not a member of them, you absolutely need to be. They are on the front lines protecting your right to own and responsibly use firearms in Canada lawfully. Without them, we'd be in a much tougher spot than we are right now. If you're not yet a member of the CSSA, go to cssa-cila.org or do what I do and Google them. Join today. Okay, so new poll coming out. Let's back up. Monday, the election officially begins. But, I mean, we've been in the election for... really since kind of the New Year's Christmas break. It's been building up it's just been kind of increasing, kind of like a wave building up steam, and now it's just going to crest when the writ drops. It's not like we've had in the past where the government just called the election whenever it wanted, or in 2015 and in 2019 where there was a fixed election window. We knew it would be vaguely in the spring, early summer-ish of the year, and what year it would be. Oh no, not 2015, because Jim Prentice broke that law. So forget that one. But at least last time, and in 2012, that happened too. This time we have a fixed election date, which makes it much more certain, and the parties have planned around it. But on Monday, the writ finally drops. The official election period gets underway. And there's some new polling. There's been a lot of polling out, but brand new one today from Abacus Data, David Coletto. Fascinating stuff. Now, this has got the UCP and the NDP, not just in a statistical dead heat, but in an exact dead heat at 36% each support among decided voters. The Alberta Party, ever so hopeful, at 4%. Other parties, 3%, but a very high undecided at 22%. I mean, it's an absolute dead heat. If you take the undecideds out, generally it's 47 UCP, 47 NDP, 46 NDP. Just the way that works out with some of the decimals around there. But then there's the Battleground Calgary, where everyone agrees the election is mostly going to be decided. There's a few the donut ring around Edmonton is going to be a battleground, very important. few tiny seats here and there. Banff, Kananaskis, west of Calgary. Lethbridge East, the one UCP seat in Lethbridge is going to be a battleground. But the big prize is Calgary. Who wins Calgary is likely going to win the election. There, the UCP have a slight lead. 49 UCP, 42 NDP, 7 Alberta Party. We'll start with you, Nigel. We've had a lot of polls coming out lately. But it's quite a shift over the last year where the UCP was far behind the NDP. It's now back to competitive. Some polls have the UCP slightly, but it's generally pretty neck and neck. Is this good news for the UCP or bad news? If you're Daniel Smith right now, how are you taking the news of this poll?
Well, I think if I were Daniel Smith, I'd probably be quite encouraged that 3 months ago I was a lot further behind than I am now. Problem with these dead heat polls is that you really can't predict how it's going to break, because you can win a seat by a couple of dozen votes. I mean, federally, I've seen seats change hand on as few as 2 votes. Yeah. So you're saying, well, we're roughly equal. Well, that could just depends where that couple of hundred votes goes. And if it's distributed through 3 or 4 key constituency, and you fit the 50 you need here, and the 40 you need there, and the 60 you need there, well, then guess what? You've got 40 seats for a very small investment of votes.
Well, what you're talking about is vote efficiency. That you don't necessarily.
Well, that's the jargon term for it. Certainly, amongst us guys, we can talk about that. But just generally speaking, so I always think of the 2011 federal election when it came right down to it, about 5,000 votes distributed where they went made the difference, and with 16 million people voting. Now here in Calgary, you're talking about half and half, 36. There's an undecided. That's obviously going to be a factor. Mm-hmm. But where those votes actually end up is something you can't tell from the polls. So I wouldn't be breaking out the champagne just yet.
Cory, I think it's probably fair to say the UCP have a bit more of an efficient vote. We're talking about vote efficiency here. And it's because the NDP have run up such massive leads in Edmonton. I mean, you got to feel for Casey Madu, who's really swimming against the tide here. The NDP is 63% in Edmonton, absolutely crushing it. UCP far behind at 28. I mean, it's possible if that 28% is concentrated enough in, say, the Southwest, that Casey Madu maybe can pull it out. But that's tough. But to what Nigel was saying about voter efficiency, that the UCP aren't running up the super massive at least, surpluses in votes that they were outside the 2 major cities, rural Alberta for short. They're at 59%, NDP at 35%. They're going to probably win at least the vast majority of those seats. But it's Calgary, 49-42. Still close, but that's where your voter efficiency really matters. If you're Rachel Notley looking at this, you're tied in the provincial vote, just a little bit behind in Calgary. Are you looking at this and saying, okay, this poll is good news, this is making my day, or is this a bad news poll for you?
I think for Rachel Notley, it's a bad news poll. I mean, it's not the end of the world. We've still got a whole campaign to go, but it's showing her
started officially.
They've got to move a needle like that. Those numbers, if they sit as they are, mean a UCP majority. I mean, it'll be a reduced one, hopefully a humbled one, I guess. But she has to pick up seats in Calgary. It is the UCP's to lose, and the UCP. It's certainly got some challenges, but they've got a number of incumbents running, and that's always, quite often an advantage in those ridings. The other thing that pollsters have a hard time with Conservatives, and I know they try to account for it, but if you look at the poll numbers and the ages, I mean, the youth vote, a lot of them go to the NDP. Mm-hmm. But the youth vote also, if there's something good on TV, are often not prone to going out and bothering to vote. The older voters have a much higher turnout for their demographic, and again, pollsters try to account for that, but often Conservatives can be underrepresented.
Like 2011, Trudeau, he brought out young voters. Obama, 2008, they managed to mobilize those demographics, and it kind of throws all your polling math out the window, because you have to kind of take into account how likely is this demographic.
I don't see Notley energizing the youth this time around. Really, she's getting organized labor, she's doing things, but she's not getting a wave of excitement. Even Nenshi managed to bring about kind of a younger demographic and get them off their butts to vote.
Yeah.
But I don't see that excitement.
Even among unions, you just touched on unions. It's interesting. So we'll kind of break it down. UCP is leading among men and older people, NDP among women and younger people. People with a high school degree in college, much more likely to vote UCP, but the NDP lead among people with a university degree. But on unions, so 17% said that they're currently a part of a union. I'm not sure how representative that is in Alberta or not, but it's probably roughly there. The NDP have only a 9-point lead among unionized people. And when you take into account that unions now tend to be dominated by government employees, which you assume are almost certainly voting NDP, because who gets the probably good to have a friendly employer. Look what's happening federally. The PSAC is probably going to get a pretty good deal out of the Liberal NDP coalition there. The NDP among all unionized people in Alberta, government and private sector unionized employees, the NDP have only a 9% advantage. What does that say to you, Nigel?
Says people don't like paying union dues, for one thing. It also says that people who work in manual occupations, I'm thinking of the oil patch, construction generally, just because they're in a union doesn't mean they're socialistically inclined. They've got to be in to get the job. So
but the NDP is a labor, in its constitution, it is a labor socialist party. And it's formally tied in with the Alberta Federation of Labor. You've got, Nazi baiters like Gil McGowan there. So the Alberta Federation of Labor is a formal component of the NDP. They're supposed to be the party of organized labor, of unions. And they have a lead among union employees, but not that big.
Well, I just say, not everybody likes the deal that they have to belong to a union in order to work. If that's the work they want to do, then that's the deal. They do it.
Some of
they
it,
don't like it.
Some of it too is that distinguishment between trade unionists and civil servant ones, which there's a larger civil service, but it's kind of as Nigel's saying, the lunchbox carrying guy who's going to the factory who's a union man still might like the organized labor too, but he's got no use for the woke. And when the labor unions and Gill and the rest are all focused on that one, they're worried about getting better, wage agreements and things. That'll sour them on the NDP as well. Like they want to stick to the labor front, not necessarily the social justice.
It's a slight tangent, but I think relevant. I went down some West Virginia rabbit hole the other day. I don't know why. I just wanted to learn everything about West Virginia. And West Virginia from the 1930s until very recently was one of the most reliably blue Democratic states, beginning with FDR, because it had such a high such a large number of unionized private sector workers. And the Democrats were the party of the unions. But that has radically shifted. West Virginia now is the deepest of deep red states in the United States. It voted nearly 70% for Trump. The biggest vote Trump got anywhere in any state was West Virginia, formerly one of the bluest states. And I've got to be thinking this is some of it's economics, and that the identification of unionized workers with social democratic parties is primarily more of a government union now thing, but more so that it's culture wars. That our parties are less about economic classes now than they are more about cultural classes. And if social democratic or left-leaning progressive parties are dedicated to talking about constant trans issues and everything's woke justice kind of stuff, that's got to be putting them off. I don't know, either of you, what's your take up on what this shift is among traditionally blue-collar unionized workers away from their traditional parties that have traditionally backed organized labor?
There's two ways to come at this. One is to ask, has the Democratic Party in West Virginia preserved the jobs of the blue-collar labor force down there, and use that as a metaphor for working people everywhere and their relationships to socialist parties? The answer is no, because it was the Democratic Party that wanted to shut down the coal mines, and that's a pretty strong industry in West Virginia.
You could probably see a parallel with, say, unionized workers in the oil sands here, who are at least suspicious of the NDP.
You work for the Boilermakers, but you're getting signals that the NDP wants to shut down the oil sands. Well, what are you going to support?
The other way to come at it is to look at your comment about the culture wars and ask what kind of beer these people are drinking.
These guys were people who used to drink Bud Light.
Yeah.
Maybe do again. I don't know.
Maybe
I've
they
worked
will
in
again
West
one day,
Virginia.
not this week.
They've got the Marcellus Play on the Pennsylvania on the west end of it there, and a lot of oil field and that. And
You used to work in West Virginia?
I've done some contracts.
Of course you did.
It's a
you
special state, and an interesting one. But it's a good parallel to bring up because, those necks are as red as they get. I worked near New Martinsville, West Virginia, and their point of pride was they were the last documented tarring and feathering of a person from 1935 or something. It was a woman who slept with the wrong woman's husband, and they ran her out of town and tarred and feather, and they have a plaque downtown to commemorate it. But again, so we're not talking a good bastion of progressives who want to get on social justice issues in that part of the world.
No.
So the Democrats are losing that segment without doubt.
Yeah. So there's a lot of undecided voters in this, 22%. Now that's higher than, say, Janet Brown's polls, but they're using different methodologies. And the polls are a snapshot in time. They're not going to tell you what's going to happen. They tell you, if they're done well, what would happen in this exact moment in time in which you're polling, only over 2-3 days kind of thing. UCP voter, or people who voted UCP last time in 2019, though, make up most of the undecided. So they asked how people who voted UCP last time are going to vote, how people who voted NDP last time are going to vote this time. 60% of people who vote, only 60% of people who voted UCP last time say they're definite to vote UCP again. Now that's down a bit, so it's moving in the UCP's favor. But NDP, people who voted NDP last time are damn sure they're voting NDP again. They're at 87%, and 6% say they're back in the NDP. But people who voted UCP last time, 13% of them say they're going to vote NDP. But then there's a lot of undecideds. I think in large measure, with Smith's ascension as UCP leader, she's pulled, I think, most of that right flank back in. People who are looking at something like the Wild Rose Independence Party, who are walking away on the right under Kenney, who are upset with him over COVID things and upset with him over his perceived weak stance on Ottawa. I think she's brought most of those people back in. Would I be right in saying that these are probably maybe redder Tories, moderate conservatives who maybe just think she's a little too wild rosy?
There's a point in any electoral cycle where people say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to vote for those people ever again. They did something that I really don't like. And then the closer you get to the election, the more you start to think, well, okay, I don't really like that person, but I like that one even less. And that kind of thinking is going to be encouraged by the UCP during the weeks to come. And I think it's pretty potent, because when you really start to look at the NDP, if you've always been a UCP person, if you're a small C conservative, never mind a big C conservative, you're going to look at these people and say, I don't think I can back that. I may not have voted for Danielle Smith as leader. I might have preferred somebody else. I might want Jason Kenney back, but I don't want the NDP back.
So we're seeing
going to come over
on both sides. We're seeing that as the primary motivator among people who say they're voting NDP. They asked, what are your biggest reasons? And the leading one by far was, I don't want the UCP and Danielle Smith. Number two was, I like Rachel Notley and the NDP. Same on the other side among people who say they're voting UCP. The biggest single one is, I don't like Rachel Notley. I don't want Rachel Notley and the NDP in power, or I don't like them. And number two was, I like the UCP and Danielle Smith. Cory, is that, you think, a sign that the parties are going to go, they're always going to go negative? I'm so surprised
they're going to go horrible.
Of course they go negative, because negative works. Everyone says, I don't like negative ads. But guess what? Everyone responds to negative ads.
Hey, the Alberta Party approaches every election with sunshine and lollipops, and they grab their 3 to 4%. You got to get in the trenches and throw your elbows up, and it sucks and it's annoying. But as you say, it works.
But at the same time, like, everyone's so motivated right now by the biggest motivators by far are hatred of the other guy, and never underestimate how powerful that is. It's important. But if you're advising either Smith or Notley, would you advise them to double down on just ripping the other guys up and increasing that? Or would you say maybe we've maximized that and we need to be a little sunnier and happier?
No, I think they have to carefully maximize more of the negative. And I hate to say it because everybody's ears are already hurting from all those bloody ads. But there is that big undecided bunch sitting there. And as much as it's a lukewarm thing, I think what the UCP wants is those undecideds to say, just that NDP. So I'm going to hold my nose and vote for Smith. And a vote with their nose held is worth just as much as an enthusiastic one. And they've just got to make sure people are more afraid of what Notley would bring than what Danielle Smith might bring. So I suspect they're going to carry on with it. It's going to get rough.
Yeah. We're going to turn to Calgary, but just before that, I want to note that beginning Monday, the official day that the campaign period officially starts, we're going to be beginning a new special program called Alberta Report, where we're going to, every morning around 10:30, we're going to have a special report for you on the Alberta election, everything that happened in the last day and everything that is expected to happen that day, breaking down the big stories on the campaign trail. We'll be going through the polling, we'll be going through the policy announcements, the scandalettes and the bomb throwing and all the crap that day by day on aggregate will make up what the election campaign is. So make sure you tune in. We'll have our official time decided soon, but it'll be between 10:30 every weekday morning beginning this Monday. So speaking of the smaller parts that make up the campaign, Calgary. So we already talked about the Calgary polling. That sets the table about how critically important it is. You don't win Calgary, you don't win government. Now, the UCP doesn't even need to win a majority of Calgary, but they've got to hold at least a little under half of Calgary. They probably want to have a bit more than that, but they need to hold about half of Calgary. The NDP have to sweep Calgary onto the math. But either way, they're both hot to trot, and they're making it rain. They're just throwing everything at it. All their campaign resources are on Calgary. And so far, all their spending promises are on Calgary. Just yesterday, we had Danielle Smith announce alongside Calgary Mayor Jody Gondek and some others that they're building a new Flames arena. Big corporate welfare bonanza. The provincial portion, I think, is in the high 200 millions or low 300 millions. But it's a lot of money. The city is putting in more. It's corporate welfare. I mean, the saving grace is probably that the province isn't directly paying for the building of the arena. They're demolishing the old one, and they're doing public improvements around it. So, I mean, degrees of bad. I mean, that is something that should be probably covered privately by the Flames organization. But it shows you. I mean, go back to 2012, and Alison Redford was promising government money to build an arena for the Edmonton Oilers. And Danielle Smith stood against that, calling it corporate welfare. My view hasn't changed, but maybe Danielle Smith's has. But at the same time, Rachel Notley is showering money down. You remember about 2 weeks ago, she announces her urban revitalization strategy for downtown Calgary. Now, many people might not remember that because she stepped on her own message because she refused to answer questions from the Western Standard after making a very big point about how she'll answer all reporters' questions and their follow-ups. So that got maybe a bit overshadowed. But both parties are throwing money like mad at Calgary. Let's start with you, Cory. At what point do voters stop being appreciative of the attention and start thinking it's a bit greasy? Or do they ever? Do they ever?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, they see it as money coming to me. They don't look as deep as realizing it's coming out of their own wallet. And
they probably know it, but they're happy to have it finally.
It's clear. I mean, the timing of the announcement of the arena was no coincidence. It's a major project in Calgary just before the writ drop. And it's like we said with the negative campaigning, it's effective. Even if it's shallow, even if you know what it's doing, it's effective. The arena, I mean, I'm not thrilled with having tax dollars on either level going into it, but I can see why it's going to work. And it's surprising some people who might be left because it's not least sounding a little, I listened to her press conference today, a little wishy-washy on whether she would support that after the fact. That's going to hurt her down here because there's some hardcore hockey fans, and that's actually how they'll base their vote. Well, darn it, we need that new barn. And if she's going to scuttle that deal like Gondek did with the last one, I can't take that chance. So the games with our money are going to continue. And
I'll be shocked if Rachel Notley doesn't commit to keep up the deal. She's probably not happy that she didn't get to make the announcement to do it.
She's hedging her bets right now.
But it was also announced alongside Jody Gondek, which is, I mean, hardly Danielle Smith teaming up with the big bad right-wing Huns here.
Well, I mean, Rachel Notley in a statement just about an hour ago actually tried to have it both ways by saying, well, I kind of like the idea, except but there's a secret deal that they're not releasing until after the election, and I don't think you can trust Danielle Smith. That's basically what it boils down to, although it took her 20 minutes to say it.
So is it essentially a version of, I would do that too, but I would do it better?
Well, or more in the open, I mean, this is the sort of can't trust Danielle Smith angle of attack that you're going to see more of in the days to come. Mm-hmm. But, coming back to what you were saying, Corey, do you think it makes a difference that this is a city that said no to the Commonwealth Games?
The Olympics.
The Olympics. Yeah, that was mentioned in the newsroom. Is an arena
it
might be a bit of a bad gamble. I mean, when pushed long enough, anyways, this came quickly. I mean, the Olympics, that was a discussion over months to move that needle, though, and really have people dig into the whole issue. But it is a city that doesn't feel that some sporting events are worth reaching into the taxpayer kitty for, and they did that in a vote. So it's worth noting. They haven't embraced it.
I'm also wondering what voters this is targeted at, because obviously not all Calgarians think this is a great idea. A lot of us are only ask, hey, what do you think of the playoffs today, Derek? I'm going to be honest. I don't. Or what do you think? How do you think of the Flames? I don't care until the second round of the playoffs. Was it you who said that? No, it was not.
Could have been.
Okay, I'm a bandwagon fan.
I
watch football.
I'm a Calgary fan. Okay.
Yeah, I watch football here, but hockey I'm only in until we got some real skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not all Calgarians care about this. And judging by how the Olympic vote went down and the kind of the different groups that were speaking out, my feeling is my gut tells me that kind of more hardcore populist conservative types oppose it, and some of the populist lefty types who don't like any money, they don't like business, and then populist conservatives who don't like corporate welfare for business, both of them probably voted against the Olympics and wouldn't like this kind of deal. But centrist voters who just want the government to be pragmatic, and that just means doing nice things that I like without any particular ideological penchant, they might like it. So I have a feeling this kind of might piss off some conservative wild rose types in Calgary, but that the people she's trying to bring back into the fold are those kind of moderate, kind of Kenny conservatives who haven't been too happy with her in the UCP since the change in the leadership.
That's right. And, even though the Wild Rose constituency that you mentioned just now probably isn't going to like it, it's not going to make them change their vote, because they're not going to say, well, if she's going to put in an arena, well, that means I'm voting for the NDP.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen. They'll hold their noses.
They'll break away over some issues, over mandates and masks, Ottawa issues. But I have a feeling they probably they're not like this. But I doubt they're going to not vote UCP on this.
Worst to do is make a few more stay home, perhaps, but they're not going to flip, I think, on that one.
So
probably a plus.
On net, it's a plus for Smith.
Yes,
I think strategically,
yeah. Not in terms of actual good idea, bad idea.
Yeah.
In terms of like public policy,
looking to win
money,
the election,
but in terms of
it was a
electioneering.
good policy.
Yeah, spending money on free fun stuff, bread and circuses never fails to do well.
Just as well she put through that announcement this morning about no tax increases, because that's the thing that gets you. If they're building an arena, what's this going to cost me compared to what benefit I'm going to get out of it?
Well, I mean, the Alberta government's swimming in money temporarily from oil and gas revenues. City of Calgary is a bit different. They don't see quite the same bonanzas when oil and gas are doing well. But yeah, I mean, Calgary's municipal government is always happy to raise taxes. So, okay, we're gonna switch gears. I'm gonna say switch guns. Switch guns back to Ottawa here. Fire out of the other barrel. So the federal bill currently before Parliament. It's been before Parliament for about a year now. Formalizing the Liberal ban of handgun sales and banning a bunch of what they call military-style assault rifles, which is obviously just based on they look scary. They're not made out of a wood stock and traditional gunmetal. They're black or they're camo, and that makes them more dangerous. And the Liberals try to come up with an so-called evergreen definition of assault-style military nukes or whatever. And that ran into a roadblock, particularly when Indigenous people said, like, hey, we use these things like the SKS. The SKS looks scary, but it's just a practical semi-automatic rifle, very commonly used, target shooting and hunting. And they kind of ran into big trouble. They had groups like the CSSA fighting them, but they ran into big trouble once Indigenous groups started speaking up. Now they're trying again. They've got a new amendment coming forward. And we'll get to the so-called buyback in a bit. But maybe tell us a bit just about the amendment to the bill here, what it's looking like, and why the NDP is backing it this time.
So I'll take this from our own story here, just to draw attention to our website. But the plan is to go first to the people who sell these guns, and this organization that they're approaching, the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. I've never heard of them, but apparently they represent retailers. And so it seems to be simply...
So just for context, retailers have got a bunch of these guns that they're not allowed to sell anymore because they've been banned by regulation for being sold, but they're not banned to have. And so they're kind of sitting on all this surplus firearms.
Exactly. So this may well be a way of moving some inventory as far as the association is concerned. And from the government point of view, well, these are guns that aren't going to find their way into circulation. So that's the first phase of this. The second phase, which has no timeline yet, would go after individual gun owners and not involve the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association.
Which is, just for clarity, not the Canadian Shooting Sports Association.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association.
And it's got almost the same acronym, so it's pretty confusing.
Well, we had to straighten that out. So it's hard to believe that this all started 3 years ago. It was like May 2020 when the Trudeau government used an order in council to ban 1,500 different types of models and variants of firearms.
Including some rocket launchers and anti-aircraft missiles. Stuff that I was very upset to learn I could have theoretically bought before it was banned. I always wanted a Panzerfaust.
So what they're going to be asking is owners to either sell their firearms to the government, which is the buyback word, the B word, or have them made unusable under ethics, and the government will pay for you to put a plug in your breech.
Yeah, we'll get right on that.
We'll get right on that. Yes, that's just a great idea. So that's what this is all about. You know, the question that constantly comes back to me is, given that we don't have, the school shootings and the mass murders in McDonald's and...
Well, we did have the mass murder in New Brunswick, but that was all illegal smuggled American guns.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, exactly. The thing is, you've got to go back decades to find the kind of action that would justify something like this. So what is the problem they're trying to solve? I don't think it's crime. It's got to be some aspect of the culture war that we're talking about, where they just hate the idea of people owning firearms. And they'll start with these and move on to the next.
So, Cory, Nigel was talking about these so-called I love how they call it buyback, when the government never owned the guns to begin with.
Mine aren't for sale, so there's no buying them back.
And you can't buy something that's not for sale. If you take something that doesn't belong to you, even if you leave something behind, that's not buying. That's called stealing, or at a minimum confiscation if you're the government, because it's not stealing if you're the government, I guess. But Nigel was talking about the so-called buyback aspect, but there's also now, they're kind of weaselly about what it's going to look like, but they're still trying to get this so-called evergreen definition in there to blanket ban scary guns, which the Liberals call military style.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever seen my assault style barbecue? It's a hell of a barbecue, but it's still barbecue.
I've seen you assault style the bonfire in your backyard with a flamethrower.
We don't talk about that on TV. My assault style flamethrower. Yeah. Or lighter.
Propane torch.
It's an assault style lighter.
Right.
Yeah. They got into a lot of trouble last time. How much of a minefield are they walking? Because they're coming back at it.
I think they're ideologically dedicated to this. It's sort of, as Nigel's saying, it's part of the culture wars. They want these. They just don't know how. I mean, they're trying and they keep burning their fingers when they reach. So now they've found a new low-hanging fruit to go after, and that's the retailers. There's a whole lot of guns in inventory, and you've got a nice quisling organization there that'll help facilitate this. And you've got to put yourselves in the feet of the owners of these places. You're stuck with a bunch of product. It's illegal for you to now sell. I mean, if only to stay solvent, at least if somebody's going to buy the bloody things off you, they'll grudgingly, and again, it's more with the force of the state at your back, move those firearms. I'm sure they would much prefer to sell them to customers as they used to. But it's all incremental. It's all frog in water. They know that that's still just a percentage of those newly categorized firearms. I mean, Canada is one of the most armed civilian nations on earth. People don't realize that. Like, we're like number 7 on the planet or something. Like, we have millions and millions of firearms out there. They don't know where the vast majority of them are. And the people who do own them don't trust the bloody government. So they're going to have a hell of a time trying to get these things.
And they're taking this kind of more incremental approach as opposed to in the past. In large measure, they said, because of what Alberta and Saskatchewan's governments have done, the Saskatchewan Firearms Act and the Alberta-Saskatchewan Firearms Act, the Alberta Firearms Act and the Saskatchewan Firearms Act, and they're pretty damn similar. The Alberta one was based on the Saskatchewan one, and essentially what it does is it makes it illegal for federal officers, federal officials, to confiscate weapons. Except if that weapon is found in the commission of a crime. So, if an RC goes to robbery at the 7-Eleven and the guy has got a gun, he can take that gun. That's obviously reasonable. But when they're talking about confiscating people in non-criminal situations, like, I don't know, they're just going to go to Bob's house in Red Deer County and take his stuff. Federal officials are no longer allowed to do that. Now, there are so-called confiscation officers. Imagine going to a house and announcing yourself as a confiscation officer. That's a fun job. That's like being a tax collector for the Roman Empire in Judea. I mean, it's not going to go down too well. No, it's being a British tax collector in Boston. I mean, it's not going to be a popular job in the community.
How many pounds of tea is that?
Yeah. So, and you have to be licensed by the provincial government. So essentially, the provincial governments, it can't do much to bring back the sale of reasonable firearms to own. The federal government can seem to stop that. But they can stop the confiscation, it seems, of firearms that are already privately owned. And the federal government doesn't seem to know what to do about it. Like, short of nationalize the RCMP, take away any provincial control, and order them to break provincial statute, break provincial law, and start storming houses, which is obviously absurd. I don't think that would happen. Short of that, I don't see how Ottawa can do that, at least so long as the UCP continue to govern in Alberta and the Sask Party in Saskatchewan.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, if Rachel Notley were taking questions from independent media, the big question to ask would indeed be, Madam, what will you do about the legislation that forbids the federal government to confiscate firearms?
Well, let's put that on the list, because we're going to ask the questions anyway. It's up to her if she wants to answer them.
I think it's...
Love the chance to ask it. I'm still waiting for...
Well, no, put it on the list. That's absolutely something we know.
She's welcome on the show.
And I know some of the guys in the NDP war room are probably watching this, so you can prepare your answer. Well in advance, this question's coming. And Nigel will do it with a smile. Corey probably won't smile if he does it.
I don't smile.
It's
kind of mean.
Not your style. I guess kind of bringing it back to where we were before. Do you think firearms are going to be a significant provincial election issue? Because normally we don't think of this as a provincial issue. Generally, the federal government does firearms, and that's it. But as Alberta and Saskatchewan have started to reassert provincial sovereignty over their jurisdiction here, they've gone into firearms in a very big way that has kind of put a real crimp in the federal government style here. Do you foresee firearms being a major election issue here in Alberta?
No. Shortly. No? I don't see the upside in the NDP for trying to make it one. I mean, the UCP legislation is broadly popular with people who have firearms and who there's probably a pretty high correlation between firearm ownerships and UCP.
Which is why it might be a no-lose for the NDP, because the majority of Albertans still don't own firearms. I mean, it's a minority. It's a very large minority. It's pretty big in Alberta, but it's still a minority. And I mean, most people who have firearms are proportionate. I'm pretty confidently willing to bet are voting UCP already. They're not voting NDP. So is there actually anything to lose? The NDP might have a
I don't see
My
an
point going
advantage
at it.
in diving into it.
No.
No. I mean, the NDP, as you said, some of those battlegrounds satellite around the city, or there's hunters within the city, ones like that. That you really want to open that conversation. You're really going to
But
move
are
them.
hunters really
and then-
going to vote? Hunters
then-
might dress in orange in duck season
Well,
sometimes,
I don't know
but
if I've
like,
mentioned him before, but
tradition.
my mother's husband in Idaho, the very extremely Democrat dedicated Trump derangement syndrome, but he's a Second Amendment supporter to the core. And everything else is hard left with him. But boy, if you want to flip him, try and take his gun.
but I feel like that's a pretty small number of people.
Yeah, well,
like
so that's what I'm
on
saying. Is
aggregate.
that's why it won't be an issue. I mean, the dedicates on this are already in the parties. I don't see the parties having
But, like,
much interest in
the
turning this.
The federal
into
NDP and the Liberals don't make any bones. They don't care about pissing off gun owners because most gun owners don't vote Liberal and NDP federally. And I imagine, actually, we've gotten the polling data here. People who vote NDP, obviously, but overwhelming, those who vote Liberal federally in Alberta are voting overwhelmingly NDP here. I just don't think there's a ton of gun owner and hunter votes up for grabs for the NDP. And if none of them are voting NDP anyway, the NDP might be able to appeal to some of the more pearl clutching people in the suburbs who don't own guns and don't know anything about it and say, Danielle Smith and the UCP are endangering you, and we're gonna go along with Ottawa and take these dangerous military guns out of the hands of people like the Western Standard.
Derek, they might do all of that, but they'll still get more traction by playing on the nerves and fears of people in hard to answer, hard to explain questions around healthcare. Like the ad that they're running now, shouldn't cost you anything to go to the doctor.
somebody with a credit card.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's talking about that, but that's the sort of the innuendo that will get traction. And talking about, okay, we agree with you, Rachel. Yes, nobody should have a gun, but what are you going to do about healthcare? What are you going to do about? In fact, I think really the whole election is eventually going to come down to a very simple question: what do you think about Danielle Smith? What do you think about Rachel Notley?
Mm-hmm.
That's really where the great divide in the campaign issue is going to come.
Okay, we don't have time to actually really dive into it. Well, we got to touch on it just because it's so good. Justin Trudeau says that he didn't coerce or force anybody to get vaccinated during COVID.
Misinformation and disinformation is carrying people to believe things that are untrue. And vaccinations is a perfect example of it. Like any modern bit of medical advancements, there are potential side effects in vaccinations. And there are people who've probably gotten very sick from vaccinations, on the billions of people who've been vaccinated against COVID over the past few years. But there are far more people who obviously have died due to COVID, died from not getting vaccinated. And the idea that people can fly in the face of science, well, individuals are allowed to make their own choices. There may be all sorts of different reasons why someone is hesitant to get vaccinated. But I make a distinction, and I always have, between someone choosing for personal reasons to choose not to get vaccinated and someone deliberately using misinformation to mislead and scare other people with so-called facts that aren't facts at all, that lead them to make a choice that endangers their lives and the lives of other citizens. So as Prime Minister, through the greatest public health crisis that we've faced in 100 years in this country, since the Spanish flu, my responsibility was to keep as many Canadians alive as possible. And all of the scientists and the medical experts and the researchers, not just in Canada, but around the world, understood that vaccination was going to be the way through this. And therefore, while not forcing anyone to get vaccinated, I chose to make sure that all the incentives and all the protections were there to encourage Canadians to get vaccinated. And that's exactly what they did. We got vaccinated to a higher level than just about any other of our peer countries. And that's why we had a less deadly pandemic than most other countries.
Okay, so you've heard Justin Trudeau there. He did not coerce anybody. Nice guy. Let's just read from his own words here. This was said in French, and boy, this was a big story. The Western Standard had it translated, I believe. So it was first reported here, but he said this on a French language program in Quebec. He certainly never repeated it in English, but here's what he said during COVID. We all know people who are deciding whether or not they're willing to get vaccinated, and we will do our very best to try and convince them. However, there's still a part of the population that is fiercely against it. They don't believe in science, progress, and they're very often misogynistic and racist. It's a very small group of people, but that doesn't shy away from the fact that they take up some space. This leads us as a leader and as a country to make a choice. Do we tolerate these people? Over 80% of the population of Quebec have done their duty by getting the shot. They are obviously not the issue in this situation. Well, that sounds very uncoercive to me. I'm sure people that I know who live overseas but are Canadian citizens who wish to return to Canada to go to their own parents' funerals, they were certainly not coerced when they were not allowed to enter the country unless they got the vaccination. People who were not allowed to do their jobs as truckers were certainly not coerced. People who were fired from their jobs because they were not vaccinated were not coerced. Wow.
So if I say, give me your wallet or else, am I coercing him? Of course I am. There is a consequence. There's no choice there. So get vaccinated.
I don't even think we don't have time, and I don't even think we need to get into that. It's pretty friggin' obvious to me, but it was just too good to not get into this time. Well, Nigel, Cory, thank you for your time. And thank all of you for joining us. Don't forget, Monday, 10:30 a.m. is the beginning of our special Alberta election coverage, Alberta Report. Myself, opinion editor Nigel Hannaford will be here, as well as the Western Standard's news editor Dave Naylor, and reporters of ours spread across Alberta following the leaders around, stalking them from stop to stop. Remember, if you're not already a member of the Western Standard, become one. Go to westernstandard.news, click on membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year to get you full, unlimited access to all Western Standard content. And of course, you'll be supporting bailout media like the Western Standard, looking out for the West. Thank you very much for your time. God bless. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny.
Folks, it's springtime and the Leafs are in the playoffs. Even the markets are surprised. I was going to wear a Flames jersey to represent all the red we've been seeing in the market, but I thought that might be too soon for some of you Flames fans out there. So I think we better just get into these prices just to keep everybody happy here. Cash barley's unchanged at $4.19. Feed wheat, we're sitting up $3 to $4.18 a metric. And corn, we're up $5 to $4.12 per metric. Moving to the milling wheat markets, July Minneapolis futures dropped 14.5 cents to $8.22 per bushel, with local hard red spring bid for May movement at $10 per bushel delivered. In the oil seeds, nearby canola futures went up $10.80 to $737.20 per ton, with delivered values for May movement at $17.40 per bushel. Continuing on to the pulse markets, nearby red lentil prices are trading at 34 cents a pound, and yellow peas remain at $12 per bushel. Finishing up with the cattle markets, June live cattle slid 0.4 cents to $163.63 per hundredweight. For more information on pricing, or if you just want to talk about how great those Leafs fans are, give me a call. I'm Mike Van Dyke at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99